I started working with Chopard at Cannes several years ago, and as a person who's on the red carpet, I have an opportunity to really choose almost anything. You know, everything is available to me. But if I have that choice, it became important to me to make an ethical one, and they were the one jewelry company who's made real steps towards sustainability, and that to me spoke volumes, because as a person who is, I'm a global citizen, we all are, I believe that we have a responsibility to everybody in the world, and I know that my actions, big, small, whatever, are going to affect somebody else.
I think that a milestone like today is so important. I think it's really interesting to note that Chopard's taken the initiative to make a really big deal out of this milestone. And I would say even 5 years ago, brands wouldn't have made a big deal about their sustainability leaps and bounds. They would have spent their bigger budgets and their more time on a new product or just something with a different focus. And now we're coming to a time when everyone's so aware and conscious and environmentally interested that we want to hear about things like this, and brands are recognizing that.
I think luxury has a massive say in the world, and I think Chopard leading the way we really hope that other companies will really follow this model. You know, you have how many people that are on the ground digging these minerals of gold, diamond, etc. Do they own one ring? Do they even own a house? Do they even have the capability to go to a hospital? 1 million children worldwide are digging in minerals, and it's unacceptable.
Well, first of all, we are never really going to achieve our goals unless we work together. The consumer, the businesses, the governments, and the NGOs, who all separately feel passionately about this, but can do so much more if they come together.
Today at Baselworld, Chopard announced this big commitment and achievement that from July of this year, 100% of the gold will be ethical and responsibly sourced, which is the first time a luxury watch and jewelry company does so, achieved this. It's a huge thing. But you didn't stop here, because today also you started the next phase of your journey to sustainable luxury by committing to the United Nations global goals. So today we have a big panel of experts led by Imran, who I will introduce in a minute. But first, Carolina, do you want to tell us, apart from, you know, you have climbed a huge mountain and you haven't stopped.
Well, there ain't no mountain high enough. First of all, very warm welcome again to those who have been following us this morning in our very important announcement. And as a family company and standing here for the family of Chopard, I'm very happy that we made it to 100% ethical gold. In a very short time, we started our journey in 2013, if I remember correctly. Yeah. Thanks to you and thanks to your talented husband, Colin, getting an Oscar. Yes, we have achieved something, but the journey is not finished, and we continue. So we joined the new program because we want to be able to measure the impact and the results and the achievements we have achieved thanks to what we have done, because we want to really see what is the results. So we joined the new program, and we start the journey again, or we continue our journey. Right. And I hope ask all the questions you have, because we have a great panel coming up. And thanks for coming again.
So for me personally, it's a pleasure now to welcome on stage Imran Ahmed, Editor-in-Chief and CEO of Business of Fashion, which is still, I think, the only serious fashion magazine who has been covering supply chain stories, sustainability stories, has been talking about some really uncomfortable truth behind the fashion industry. And today we'll uncover more about the jewelry industry. And Imran last week had a fantastic conversation on stage with Marco Bizzarri, the CEO of Gucci, who told you that corporate neutrality is finished. So with this in mind, I leave you the microphone and enjoy the panel.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to welcome on stage our esteemed panel, and come on, join us. As soon as we're all seated, I'll make sure to introduce everybody. So once again, thank you to Livia and Caroline for that very kind introduction. As they mentioned, today we have a very important topic to discuss. And as Livia mentioned earlier, sustainability has been a topic of great interest to those of us, our team at the Business of Fashion. And over the years, we've explored these issues from a variety of angles. And what I found so compelling about today's invitation is that we had never really had a discussion around sustainability as it pertains to the jewelry and watches sector. And of course, Chopard has been a leader in that space, and the opportunity to come here to Basel, I've never been to the watch fair before, it's quite impressive. It really presented an opportunity for us to learn a little bit from what Chopard has been doing, but also from an esteemed panel of experts that I would like to welcome. I would first like to introduce Lena Wendelen. She's the advisor on business and human rights in the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. We have Pamela Gillies, President and Vice Chancellor of the Glasgow Caledonian University. We have Cherie Blair, a leading international lawyer and campaigner for women's rights. We have Phillipe Fornier, General Secretary of the Swiss Better Gold Association, and we have my new friend Noella, who's the founder and CEO of Malaika, which is an amazing, interesting foundation in the Congo. I wanted to start today's discussion by grounding or kind of evening out our knowledge on the Sustainable Development Goals. So as some of you know, the UN last year put forth a series of 17 Sustainable Development Goals with 169 different targets. And of course, that sounds like a vast and very ambitious program. And I thought perhaps before we dive into the discussion specifically on jewelry and watches, it'd be really interesting to understand exactly what the Sustainable Development Goals are and why they are so important. Lena, do you want to start on that?
Yeah. Thank you. So basically the SDGs, as they're called, is the UN's Global Sustainability Agenda. It's the plan of action for people, planet and prosperity that is the world's plan for how to achieve a more fair and sustainable world by 2020. And the SDGs and the Agenda 2030 was adopted by the UN General Assembly, so it's the whole world that is behind. It was developed through, I think, 3 or 4 years of very extensive consultation, participation with all stakeholders from around the world. So it really is representing the aspirations of the international community, but also very much of people on the ground. As you mentioned, there are 17 goals, 169 targets that seek to realize these aspirations. We are very pleased from the UN Human Rights Office side to be able to say that 92% of the targets are in fact directly relevant for human rights. So the Sustainable Development Goals and the Sustainability Agenda is very much also a human rights agenda across economic, social, cultural rights, environmental rights, civil and political rights. The core message is the leave no one behind, so it's an inclusivity agenda. Really, this is not about some parts of society, some regions of the world moving ahead. This is about leaving no one behind. It's about every single man, woman, and child in every part of the world. And just to put a few examples, it's estimated that of between up to 48 million workers currently working as in conditions that amount to modern-day slavery. 85 million of the 168 million child laborers around the world work in what is the most hazardous conditions, which is a very serious offense under international labor law. Poor communities lose their livelihoods, their access to health, clean water, etc., as a result of mining, construction, and all agriculture. So these are just to put into perspective what are the kind of issues that the SDGs are trying to challenge. Do you want me to talk about the business role?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's what's particularly interesting, and I know I read about the Millennium Development Goals of the UN. And some of the criticism of the Millennium Development Goals is that they were not integrated with business. They were not created in a way that businesses could actually play a role. And with a changing funding environment around NGOs and with shifting power in the world towards businesses, it would be very hard to understand how the Sustainable Development Goals could be achieved without close cooperation with business. So could you talk a little bit about how that integration with business was conceived, and why is it so important for the achievement of these goals?
I think you're absolutely right that there's been a huge shift in the role, the perception of the role of business since 2000, when the MDGs were adopted, and at the time when the Agenda 2030 was adopted. A lot of things had happened in the space. Business themselves were stepping up. Some business were pressured into stepping up. We say we don't really care why companies are coming to the table. The main thing is that they do, and that they are well intended to make the difference. At the UN, we've had the UN Global Compact. We've seen the adoption of a global standard, the United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, which very much was developed with business, with the active involvement of business, but also set some parameters around what the expectations are at the global level from business. So all this led into a much more active participation in the development of the SDGs of business than was the case 15 years earlier. And that is directly reflected in the SDGs. We have one goal, Goal 17, which mentions the role of partnerships, public-private partnerships. But there's also a reference in the agenda to the responsibilities that business have to respect human rights as they are being welcomed and urged and encouraged to also contribute to the realization of these goals. So basically, when it comes to the role of business in the SDGs, we have 4 asks, if you wish, 4 expectations. The first one is that business, both in the context of SDGs, but also, I should say, any other context, put respect for human rights at the heart of how business is done. That while companies go about doing their business, they ensure that they do not harm people. That's the baseline responsibility that every company have, and we have, as I mentioned, the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, which sets the framework and provides a roadmap for how to achieve that. Then the second one is the encouragement to engage in collaborative initiatives to tackle systemic challenges, because many of the issues we're talking about, it's not the fault of one single company or one single individual or one single country even. They reflect systemic challenges across value chains, across political, geopolitical fault lines, and requires collective action in order to be able to address them. And thirdly, ensure and contribute to an effective regulatory environment. I think an important message as well is that business can and should not do this on their own. We can't say, oh, okay, governments are failing, they're not doing what they're meant to be doing, so now we're looking to companies to do this. No, there has to be, and the role of governments in providing the proper environment for companies to operate with respect and do this contribution, positive contribution that we're all looking forward to, is necessary. And finally, expecting companies to be accountable and transparent. So it's fine to say we are doing good, we are contributing, but actually being able to also demonstrate and if challenged, being able to demonstrate how that positive, respectful behavior is being achieved.
And to be able to measure it, right? Because what's really interesting is that there's not just a bunch of goals, there's a bunch of targets as well. And every organization, whether it be a private one or a public one, has a role to play in that. Pamela, you have some personal passion and interest in the idea of public-private partnerships. I'm just wondering, what do you think happens around the world if companies don't engage with these sustainable development goals? What is the risk to the achievement of the targets?
Well, as you know, Imran, I'm speaking to 32 CEOs in New York City, CEOs of the largest retail companies in the fashion sector. And I can explain to them now that we can measure these goals. That's what I love about the Sustainable Development Goals. They are tough targets, like no poverty, but you know, there are intermediary things we can measure towards that ultimate goal. And we now have evidence that we can share with these great businesses, to show them if they don't engage with the goals, then their profitability will suffer and their productivity will suffer. So they know they should engage because there's a moral requirement to do so for people in the planet. But you know, if you can show them that if they engage effectively, then they will still be profitable, and in fact could be even more profitable, then you get wholehearted engagement because they've got their little shareholders on their shoulders.
The other party that they have on their shareholders is the customers, right? What role do customers have to play in kind of sparking some of these companies? Not all of the companies are as proactive as Chopard, but there's a lot of companies that are still not actively engaging. I mean, what role can customers play in getting these companies to start engaging with the goals?
I think there's definitely a social movement now. There's an awareness that customers, especially young customers, are really interested in sustainability. So I think that's the first thing. And I think most of our CEOs in big business do understand that. Their challenge is how to meet the sustainable goals whilst maintaining profitability. Can I give you a wee example?
I would love an example.
Because, we can help our CEOs to make baby steps along the way that will then encourage them to make the big step to dealing with some of their human rights issues in their employees in Africa or in Bangladesh. We worked with a really famous company which used to put little metal pins in all of its dress shirts for men. And the number of pins they'd use would stretch from New York to Los Angeles and back again every single year. And they sourced these from China. So by showing them how to fold the shirt without needing the pins, they saved $2.3 million a year. And of course, they reduced their carbon footprint. And the male customers saw no difference, and in fact, liked the fact they'd made this change. But from that baby step, we now have that major international company looking at how they can actually invest in paying more to their employees on the ground and creating educational opportunities and health opportunities, because that can impact productivity by 4.2%. So measurement's critical. It's the evidence base that can actually shape a new future, even for the recalcitrant companies.
Right. Oftentimes when people think about sustainable development, instantly what comes to mind is the environment. But actually a big part of sustainable development is human rights. And Cherie, that's where you have a great deal of experience. And I wondered whether you could talk to us a little bit about, that very specialized point of view that you have on how human rights fit into these sustainable development goals and the things that companies like Chopard and others in the fashion and luxury goods industry should be thinking about.
Well, first of all, can I say I really applaud what Chopard has announced today. There's so many beautiful things that we see as we've passed through the halls here. And, people love beautiful things, and they have them because they want to feel good. But if, in fact, you know that beautiful thing has been created on the back of someone who's exploited in the mines where the gold comes from, or someone who's exploited where the diamonds are being polished, or someone's exploited in factories that make the boxes that these goods go in, then they lose their luster. So there really is an important business reason why beautiful things need to be pure in not just in carat, but also in heart. And the heart of that is the people who make them and who along the supply chain take them on that journey. And that's what this is all about. It's about making sure that there's dignity for everyone along that journey. And that's a whole spectrum of things that are going on, all of which play into, as Lena said, the Sustainable Development Goals, which are, if you like, our aims where we want to see the world, and then the rugged principles, the guiding principles for business and human rights, which actually lay some ground rules for businesses about, well, how if I want to be a good corporate global citizen, somebody that people feel comfortable that the beauty I'm giving them is
is absolutely right down to its core. How do I go about that? And of course, you talked about the business case. And that's very important because in today's world, with interconnectivity and people knowing about things, you can no longer say, and Noella's here, what goes on in the Congo stays in the Congo. Because what goes on in the Congo is a mobile phone photograph away from worldwide condemnation. So we are finding that the consumers are more interested in this. The investors are more interested in this, as you say, because suddenly, when you're asking yourself, is this a reliable, sustainable investment? Is my money going to be safe? What you don't want to find is that suddenly, look at Facebook. Its shares have suddenly gone down. And you know, data privacy is actually a human rights issue. So it can really affect the shares. So there's no point firefighting after the event. But neither is it just a point of paying lip service to what this means. You really have to start to understand and embed it in your culture. Because sometimes you're doing things without realizing, just because this is the way they've always been carried out. Now, this is what we lawyers call soft law. This is all about pressures and pressure groups that lead to a change in attitudes. But on top of that, of course, we then have the framework, both internationally through the principles, and then nationally. We are now seeing governments becoming more interested in this and starting to implement laws. So take modern slavery for a moment. You know, no one was talking about modern slavery even 10 years ago. Well, certain people, some of us have been in those panels before, but now people are very, very aware about what is happening and across the world. And one of the things that's happened in my country, in the UK, and in many other places now, we're from Australia to California, even some places like Qatar in the Middle East are trying to say we need to make sure that we treat the people who work for us better. So in the UK, we now have a requirement for large companies to publish a modern slavery report and say what they are doing to ensure that their supply chains are not being tainted by slavery. Now, it's only a reporting obligation, there's no teeth, but nevertheless, it's been very interesting to see both the reports that the companies have brought out and also the reaction to those reports. And just in the very act of having to think about these things, it leads to perhaps you looking at a different way about an aspect of your business. And as you say, sometimes looking at it a different way also has financial benefits. The other thing, the big human rights issue that's been happening and has been affected by the law in my country at the moment, of course, is our gender pay gap reports. And we're very conscious again because fashion and film industry all come together. So we've seen the Me Too movement, we've seen the arguments about equal pay, and now in the UK, companies who employ over 250 employees have to publish their gender pay gap. And surprise, surprise, there's not been a company yet that's been able to say there's no gender pay gap. In fact, if they did, I think people would probably think something is not, they weren't telling the truth. But what has happened is that we've seen not only a pay gap, sometimes 30, 40%, the big accounting firms, 30% difference, 40% difference in their median pay to men and women. And then if you look at their bonuses, men are getting 70% more in their bonuses than women. Now, is this just natural? Is this the way it is? Or is it about systemic flaws in the business model that carries on doing things the way we've always done, with very serious consequences for their employees? So it's about getting ahead of the curve, because I don't think we're going to see the end of just reporting. We're going to see governments taking more interest in this. We're going to see more governments. There's a European directive coming in, so across Europe there's going to be more reporting on human rights obligations of a company. And the scrutiny that that will lead to is a challenge, but it's also an opportunity, because it's an opportunity that Chopard has illustrated to grasp that and to say, this is what we stand for as a company, this is what we're about, this is why we are a global citizen that you can be proud of investing in, you can be proud of working for, and you can be proud of wearing beautiful things made by us.
One of the complications in managing issues like human rights and sustainability and some of the other issues that have been raised today is that supply chains are not completely vertically integrated, right? So many companies in the world, they have outsourced partners or vendors or sources where they get the raw materials to make their goods. And Phillipe, you're an expert in the sourcing of gold, which is obviously a really, really important part of this industry. What can you tell us about the kind of supply chain of gold and other precious metals, and how companies in this industry should be thinking about managing supply chains, which can be quite broken up? It's not all owned by the company itself.
You're right. Value chains are very complicated from the mine to the market. But I will talk more specifically about what we have been doing with the Swiss government in a public-private partnership for the last 5 years. And I'm very happy and very proud that Chopard is joining us in these efforts as of this year. And I promise we're going to do our best to supply the volumes they need. Now, this idea started in 2013. On the public side is the Swiss government, more specifically the Economy Secretariat. And on the private side is the Swiss Better Gold Association with Chopard today, and also some historical members like the Swatch Group, UBS, the Cartier, all the large Swiss refiners, Pump, Metalor, Argor, and Valcambi, and also Pressinox. Fair Trade is part of the association also from the beginning. And what we have been doing is focusing on the artisanal and small-scale miners, gold miners, in Peru for the first periods, helping them getting to certification level, Fair Trade, Fair Mind, or RJC, and then creating the value chain from these small artisanal mines to the brand or bank at the end of the chain through the complex refinery and all the other processing suppliers that you have there.
But before we talk about the actual public-private partnership, I think it's really important for us to understand the challenges that exist. So when you're sourcing gold or other precious metals, where do things break down? And then, of course, we can talk about the solution, but I think it's important for people to understand what the problems are first.
Okay, so the artisanal and small-scale miner ecosystem in the world is very complex. You have estimates from the UN, about 20-30 million people working in that activity, 5 million women and kids. We don't know exactly, but that's the estimates the UN are giving. We're talking about 2,000 tons of mercury being used roughly. Nobody really knows how much every year, getting into the lungs of the kids or getting out in the river, in the Amazon or any river in Asia. You're talking about risks for the kids that are in the mines, especially in Africa, where they send them because they're smaller. They send them in the mines, in the small holes. It's easier to send kids. So you're talking a huge environmental and social and human issue. So what we have decided with the Swiss government is that we cannot start everywhere. We have to start in places where there is some governance or a good governance, like Peru, Colombia. Now we are extending in Colombia and Bolivia, where the authorities are supporting us. It's very hard to start in a place where you don't have the support of the local authorities, not because they don't want, because they can't. So in Peru, the first few years were very good and positive. Of course, we have challenges, and you know, we cannot bring enough gold. As you have heard, you know, many brands like Chopard or Cartier don't have enough of this gold, but we have seen a positive trend. We have seen that more and more artisanal miners in Peru want to make the changes to get to certification level and supply directly international Swiss refiners rather than selling their gold to corrupt in-betweeners in Lima or in other areas in Peru. So by making the change more direct, selling directly from the small mine directly to a reputable refiner, and then this refiner can, of course, sell directly to the brands, we are removing a lot of the issues. So also what we realized is that the reality on the ground in these countries and the level that the standards like fair trade and fair mind are, the gap is far too big most of the time. And we have seen that has been a big obstacle to scale up. So what we did with our members, we implemented that end of last year, and I hope we have the first concrete results this year, is we have created what we call a minimum criteria, which you have to imagine that as a bridge between the reality on the ground and the certification schemes. So it's a way to bridge that so that these artisanal miners have access to the international markets at an earlier stage, where they'll see the benefits and improve their practices much faster.
I see. Noella, you bring a very interesting perspective to this conversation, because through the work that you do in your home country in Congo, you see the impact on some of the people that Phillipe was just mentioning, the real people that bring some of these raw materials out of the earth. Can you talk about what you've observed directly in your own country, and how maybe some of the stories or observations you have about the impact it can have on real people at the end of the day?
So hi, thank you very much for inviting us, and congratulations, Chopard, for all the work you're doing in Ethical. I've been traveling last month. I was in Senegal, I've been to Johannesburg, and I'm 2-3 times a year in Congo, and I go with my children there too. I'm seeing lorries living, I was born in Lubumbashi, one of the richest provinces in the world in terms of mining. You have the cobalt, you have coltan in the east side, you have the uranium. You're seeing everyday lorries living through Zambia, going through Johannesburg. The problem is mining companies sometimes go to countries and they say, okay, we're going to create community program. We're going to create a school, a hospital, what else? First of all, can you listen to the community? What is their needs? What do they want? They want good salaries. They want good living. They want to work in good conditions. We need to stop bringing the materials out of the country. I do think we need to polish them and transform them on the country and then going. And secondly, we don't see any women. When you go to all this mining, when you talk, if you go to most of this conference, there's not enough women trading, there's enough women in the mining sector, there's not even one African woman as president in Africa, or even as a first minister, maybe one country we have in Africa. So there's a completely new way of thinking. The young generation that's, like I said this morning, is 60%. And this new generation knows what's going on in the world through social media, reading. They don't want to be beggars of the supply chains. They don't want to be beggars of the mining. They want solutions. They are eager to learn jobs. They want to be educated, but the solution neither is we need to create more vocational trainings for them to be like working in the supply chains, or to have access to jobs. Not only they can have going to university, but you're seeing where are the mining in all these countries that are very rich in Africa. There's hardly no infrastructure. Children, more than 7 million kids doesn't go to school in Congo, 263 million out of school worldwide, 1 million children still working as artisanal people working in the mines. Nowadays, if we talk about sustainable development goals, we cannot have any children going to work in mining. And that's something that all the companies worldwide has to prioritize. These children need to go to school. They need to have access to health. They need to be dreaming of becoming a doctor or working in jewelry. And these people that are working in mining, do they dream one day to have a necklace or a ring? Do they dream to have an iPhone 7 or 8 or being on social media? No, they don't have access to that. So they're feeling, the new generation feeling, we've been colonized before, but now we are economically colonized.
But I think the point about all this is, You can't expect business to do this on its own, and that's why going back to the Sustainable Development Goals, going back to the principles, it has to be a cooperative venture on so many levels. Because as you said, you know, you can't do everything if the government isn't cooperating. You know, and we have corrupt governments. You know, there are people in the Congo who are very rich indeed, and who are taking the people's wealth for themselves, and that's not just in the Congo. Then you have to also have cooperation with NGOs, particularly as Noella says, NGOs on the ground, because they're the ones who actually know what's going on, and they're the ones who have the voice for the people. And then you also, of course, need to have the help of business, not just because business has great skills in finding solutions. I mean, these are the things businesses are good at, but also because businesses are citizens like the rest of us, and we all benefit when everyone works together. So this is not something that Chopard's going to be able to do on its own, but what it can do is set an example so that people in this building here today start talking about, you know, how can we make sure that the things we're looking at here are not just beautiful to look at, but are beautiful at source.
I would agree with that, and I think Chopard has shown leadership in this arena. I think business can demonstrate leadership, and if we get peer networks of very senior business leaders. Paul Pullman was a lone voice for many, many years, but now at Davos in January, I heard Indra Inouye from PepsiCo talking about the need for sustainability. So, you know, we're on the cusp of a really big movement happening, and if all of these CEOs and public companies and privately owned companies can show the leadership that Chopard has and come together with other organizations, we really can shift this, because we've only got 12 years to meet some of these targets.
And we do need laws for that as well, actually.
Yeah.
Because in a sense, it's fine if good companies do it, but if their competitors are undermining that by not complying with these standards, then it is more difficult. And that's why you need governments to pass the laws, because it does ensure a level playing field, and it does ensure that people are held to account, and that's a good thing.
Yeah. So, first of all, thank you all for your perspectives, because I think the combined expertise of this panel has really helped to frame the challenge and the opportunity on so many different levels. We do have time for a few questions from the audience, and I wanted to open it up to questions now.
Don't be shy.
Yes, okay, I'm not surprised Livia has a question. Yes, Livia.
I have a question for Cherie, because you started answering, because law is fundamental, and it was very interesting working, for example, on the living wage with the Lawyers Circle as part of the NGO with Annie Lennox that we set up, with Miriam Gonzalez Durantes as well, where we did the talk on the modern day slavery bill. And, you know, the issue of the living wage has been discussed for over a century, since the Treaty of Versailles after the First World War. And today still, companies are talking and discussing, what is the living wage, what do we do? But then the lawyers come in and say, hold on a second, can we actually establish the legalities and illegalities of this? And once they establish it, the conversation changes completely. So in terms of the global goals and business accountability, the law is absolutely fundamental. How far do you think we are from having a legal requirements? I mean, we just saw the French government actually made a step forward from the English modern day slavery bill, because now they make the requirements for big companies is actually compulsory. But how do you think, how far away are we from saying it's actually legal?
Well, I think still quite a way, but it's work in progress, and it becomes, you know, you have to have a political will to make a law, but the law in itself is not enough. I mean, I started my legal career at a time when we implemented Equal Pay Act, that's in the UK. And here we are, 40 years on, and we still are talking about equal pay, because these things are not just simply something you can write off with a stroke of a pen. I mean, Noella talked, and Phillipe talked about, if you're a poor family in Peru and you have no other means of feeding yourself, then you may not feel that someone coming and telling you that you shouldn't be sending your children down the mine is very helpful. We have to do things to help those people be able to feed themselves without sending their children down the mine. So it is also very complicated and interrelated, and it's actually why we need, for example, the European Union to act on this. So we're now seeing the UK, we're seeing France, we're seeing Germany, we're but actually at some point, I suspect we will probably, we're seeing already the EU directive, so we have to work together, because if we don't work together, then you can be undermined by people who are not playing by the same rules.
But these companies can flout the law because it maybe doesn't exist in Ethiopia. So they might move their 40,000 jobs from Bangladesh to Ethiopia and pay their, which we already happened, and get away with it because that law doesn't pertain in Ethiopia.
Why
but if I can show them that it's better for their business and that their business model is more sustainable, if they don't do that their productivity will go up, if they take care of their workforce, then, they're a bit hard-nosed about the bottom line dollar.
But that's where the law comes in again.
And
because if you can also show them if they don't do that, they'll get caned as well.
Yeah.
Then,
Yeah, exactly.
there needs to be a bit of teeth.
The two things.
Lena, you have something to add?
Yeah, just on the business case, I think it's very important to find the business case. I do want to just add as a little fly in the ointment that sometimes there isn't a business case necessarily for doing this. So I think it's important to re-emphasize the importance of doing it, even if there isn't a business case, because the business case also will vary a lot from business sector to business sector. So I totally get that it's important, and many business sectors and many operational contexts will have a business case, but some actually won't. And that means that we can't just give the message that, okay, there's no business case, so I don't need to do it. I also, just on the issue of the law, being a human rights lawyer myself, I have great confidence in law, but I'm also painfully aware of the limitations. And the living wage issue is a particularly, I think, contentious issue around that, because that is a contextual issue. What is a living wage?
It's not contentious anymore. I should send you the legal report.
I think the principle, but what does it look like? And that's why I think some of the reporting requirements and the due diligence requirements that is in the UN guiding principles, it's about companies being able to demonstrate how they are satisfied and being able to report on how they are assured that their particular operations pay a living wage to their workers. So again, a living wage differs whether we're in Basel or whether we are elsewhere. The principle is the same, but what it actually looks like in practice. So having processes in place and having reporting requirements and doing the due diligence to ensure that you actually know when you're reporting that you are paying a living wage, I think is something that many lawyers sort of a little bit uncomfortable with, because it's not such a sort of a hard and fast concept. Yes, thank you.
Do we have any other questions? Yes, over here.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. I'm Lulu from Indonesia. I'm a businesswoman myself. I also run my own magazines, Collector's Guide Watches and Jewellery. So I'm very impressed with what Chopard has already done for so many years. And then, but as Asian myself, I'm from Indonesia, we have been in this worship problem over and over again. I mean, back in so many islands, we have like 3,000 islands. We have like islands with poor people, and like she mentioned before, if they have no choice to survive, then they would do anything they could just to survive, just for another day. So they could, just sell the gold and everything. We have a lot of mining, gold mining. We have pearls. We have everything. So how do you think that we can cope with that? Like, this is a big problem for everyone, not only like in some part of the world. So my question is, if we even get together all the jewelers, the responsible people. But still, in the end, we still have to face with the fact that it is not that easy. And for me, as a media, I also try to also extend all the messages from you all to these people through the meetings and everything, seminars. But in the end, that is still our problem until today. So is there any...
But Lulu,
yeah?
You're so right. Of course we're not, we're not going to build nirvana tomorrow. And it's a long, painful process. But we have to start somewhere. And we have to draw a line in the sand and say, in future, and it's what Phillipe was saying, we can't get there. You were talking about the gold. You can't always get to those top standards tomorrow, but you can get to an intermediate standard and you can start setting goals. That's, again, the Sustainable Development Goals are about it. But unless we talk about it, unless we measure it, unless we are aware of what's going on and push for change, then things will just not change. And that's why it's important, and it's why it's important. It's not just up to the jewellery industry. It is also up to the government, and it is also up to all of us as consumers.
And I think it's very important to show positive stories. So I think the way that Chopard is working and leading the way, it will probably lead other companies to do it. Because if we're seeing the industry completely dark, I think nothing will happen. Like, for instance, in Congo with the coltan and everybody talking about the green energy, the green boom. But we don't know the consequences where the cobalt come from and how he's been leaving the country and is still coming out from a war zone. But I think in everything we've been talking, it's very important that we, as consumers, should not accept any product from conflict zone. It's very important that we get a mineral from country where there is peace and there is human rights being respected.
And I think we also have to make sure our new business leaders, our young business leaders, are taught appropriately in our business schools. We have 14,000 business schools around the world teaching MBAs, teaching the next cadre of business leaders. Only 5% of them are in the United Nations Principles for Responsible Management Education group, all taking the UN Sustainable Development Goals and creating those goals as a core module at the heart of MBA education. Only 5%. So we really do need to ratchet that up. And I think our university leaders have a role to play for the future generation. But that's not going to happen tomorrow. It will take time.
It's true for lawyers as well, actually.
Yeah.
You'd be amazed at how many corporate lawyers and things like that think that human rights isn't about them.
Yeah.
And I absolutely keep telling them, it's absolutely about you. And you're not a corporate lawyer, I'm a human rights lawyer. We're both human rights lawyer, because if law isn't about human rights, what is it about?
Yeah. Okay. I think we have time for maybe one final question. Yes.
Good afternoon, my name is Johanna and I'm from Style Fellow. We have been discussing now about human rights and right to education and so on relating to the goals. Actually, I have two questions. I want to have an answer on your point of view. How many businesses in the industry have been thoroughly thinking through the goals and how they could be contributing to each of the advancement of the goals? And the second question is, what could we say to a regular consumer what they should be looking for when they are trying to find the conscious choices to have something as good as now with Chopard, with the ethical standards? So what would be your advices to the consumers? And on the other hand, what's the situation in the industry thinking about the goals in overall, not just from the human rights perspective or some other perspective, but if we think all the 17 goals?
So let's take the first part of the question, which was really about how, what level of engagement is there really in our industry with regards to the Sustainable Development Goals. Livia, do you have a point of view on that? Can we have a microphone for Livia, please?
You should come on the panel, Livia.
I wanted to let you guys be much more knowledge than me, but because we have looked at, obviously, at this in terms of how many business overall have committed to the global goals. Probably Pamela has a pretty good idea. But in terms of the luxury jewelry and watch industry, Tiffany has done a commitment, a pledge to commit, but they haven't, as far as we are aware, started measuring the impact yet. And Chopard is the one that just starting to measure thoroughly through all the 17 goals, particularly goal number 8 and 10, the ones that are really relevant to their supply chain, to start looking at reduced inequalities and responsible consumption and production, and putting those measurements in place.
I was reading some data on the plane over this morning, and it seems to me that there's, I think the number was 92% of companies are currently aware of the Sustainable Development Goals, but in terms of actual engagement, the number is far, far, far lower. So there's clearly not just in the luxury and jewelry industry, but just in overall and across industries, there's still a big gap in terms of the number of companies who are really integrating this kind of thinking into their strategies.
But that's why this is important.
Yeah.
And I'm sure we both do. I consult with companies and to try and help them become aware. But half the time, the challenge is to get them to be aware in the first place, because they don't even know that they don't know, if you see what I mean. And so the first challenge is to let them realize that they don't know, and then is to help them so that they do know.
And can do something about it.
Because they can do something about it.
Because they can, as long as they're not lambasted for the baby steps.
Yeah. And that's why it's like the modern slavery reporting, the global gender gap reporting that we've got are good because they shine a light on it. But I do think we have to be realistic and careful that we don't, the way we use the data. Because if we just use the data to punish the people who've actually reported, what you'll find is you'll get fewer people actually being willing to put up. So what we're looking for is an engagement, an acknowledgement there's a problem, and saying we are going to take steps towards a solution without everyone saying we expect you to have solved the problem tomorrow, because we're not going to be able to solve the problem tomorrow. And things like modern slavery, no one company can do that. Chopard can't suddenly transform the places where they source their source materials from into places with developed world standards in health, education, and job opportunities. That they can play their part in moving the needle.
The problem with the global goals also is that, and this is where the second question about consumers, they're so ethereal, like they're not practical. And so if you stop someone on the street and say, hey, do you know about the global goals? They're like, but what? The global what? So this is why I love what Pamela is doing, the work, and the fact that she's linking it to profitability, because I don't agree that, I think there is always a case for, a business case for applying that. I don't know which one you can refer to that there is no business case, but when you link it to profitability, the company says, okay, we have to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Because we make more money. And then that's how the hook, you put it on a very, very practical level. And ultimately, this measurement and this target make a business sense because they help you save money and being profitable in 10, 20 years' time, because you are securing the human capital, the social capital. It is a no-brainer.
And Imran, about 30% of companies in the fashion industry, who would have thought fashion could be an instrument for sustainability, for goodness sake? But 30% of them are actually now actively working with Bloomberg's environmental, social, and governance disclosure scale, because they know there's $23 trillion available for sustainable investment if they can reach 100 on that scale. Most of the companies I work with, very famous ones, are about 30, 40 on that scale rating. But they want to go up it because they know they'll have access to sustainable capital. But that capital's for investment in their employees, in green workplaces, in education programs of the sort that Luel is leading in the Congo.
Well, it's interesting because Arizona and I were talking about this over lunch about 5 or 10 years ago even. If you talked about sustainability as it pertained to the fashion industry, people wanted to hide the, like I know of big companies that actually have a lot of practices, but they didn't want to talk about them because somehow it was seen as antithetical to the idea of luxury. And I think the big progress with consumers is really about educating consumers that sustainable thinking is luxury, right? That is luxury. Anyway, we've run out of time. I want to thank our panelists, Noella, Phillipe, Cherie, Pamela, and Lena for all of their expertise. I want to thank Chopard and Livia, EcoAge, and Caroline for inviting us to have this conversation. I learned a lot from the chat today. I hope all of you did as well. And hopefully, this is the first step in a long journey towards sustainable thinking in our industry. Thank you so much.
Thank you.